Good morning, boys and girls, and welcome to History Lesson 156. Today we're going to talk about what happens after those two wars that we talked about in the last chapter. So let's begin, like we usually do, with our presidents, and we'll review some states and capitals. Here we go.
Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Jackson, Bury, Harrison, Tyler, Polk, and Taylor, Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan, Lincoln, Johnson, Grant, and Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, and Clinton, George W. Bush, Obama,
And Trump. All right, let's remember our states and capitals.
New Hampshire and Vermont, Massachusetts and Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware and Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, these are the states of the East Coast. States like Kansas, Ohio, Alabama, Indiana, Indianapolis, Illinois, St. Kim, Wisconsin, Madison, Minnesota, St. Paul, Iowa, Missouri, Jefferson City, Arkansas, Little Rock, Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Mississippi, Jackson, these are the little states.
NSNKOT.
NSNKOT.
North Dakota Bismarck.
North Dakota Bismarck.
South Dakota Pierce.
South Dakota Pierce.
Nebraska Lincoln.
Nebraska Lincoln.
Kansas Topeka.
Kansas Topeka.
Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City.
Texas Austin.
Texas Austin.
Yeah.
Wow.
Good job.
Kent.
California Sacramento.
California Sacramento.
Oregon Salem.
Oregon Salem.
Washington Olympia.
Washington Olympia.
California Sacramento.
California Sacramento.
Arizona Phoenix.
Arizona Phoenix.
New Mexico Santa Fe.
New Mexico Santa Fe.
Texas Austin.
Texas Austin.
Munich.
Montana Helena.
Montana Helena.
Idaho Boise.
Idaho Boise.
Wyoming Cheyenne.
Wyoming Cheyenne.
Nevada Carson City.
Nevada Carson City.
Utah Salt Lake City.
Utah Salt Lake City.
What's last? Colorado Denver. What's this on top of Colorado, everybody? Good job. Alaska Juneau.
Alaska, Juneau.
My favorite. Hawaii Honolulu.
Hawaii, Honolulu. Good. Let's review this chart. We haven't seen this in a while. Let's do the first one. We have Plymouth, 1620. You see that? We have Jamestown in 1607, Roanoke, and St. Augustine. Those are the first four settlements. If you remember, those are the first four that we talked about when we were also talking about the history of Florida. We talked about St. Augustine. So let's remember those. So Plymouth, Jamestown, Roanoke, St. Augustine. Repeat after me. Plymouth, Jamestown, Roanoke, St. Augustine. Good. All right. And our lakes. Do you see these lakes up there? We had an acronym for those lakes. Do you remember? Silly monkeys. H. What was the H? I'm trying to remember. Silly monkeys have. Oh, I hope you can remember. I can't remember. It's been so long since we've seen this chart, but let's do Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario. All right. Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario. Something about everyone. Silly monkeys. Something everyone. You'll remember it. You can let me know during the Google Meet if you remember it, boys and girls. And there's one other settlement that you see here on this chart. It's up there called Quebec. Do you see it? Quebec. Now, yes, that's one of the first early settlements. It was a French settlement, to be exact. But how come we don't talk about it much when we talk about the United States? Where is it located, boys and girls? Good. It's in Canada. It's not really part of the United States, but it was one of the first early settlements that we did talk about. We have one more chart here that we want to go over. If you remember, these are the 13 colonies. You will need to know these. We did these earlier in the year, but let's remember them. We have the New England colonies. Those are the ones in green: New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut. We have the middle colonies: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware. And we have the southern colonies. Remember, we had a saying for that also: Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. I don't remember that one either. You guys will remember these things. You have a better memory than I do. But just remember those states and their different sections: New England, middle colonies, and southern colonies. All right, boys and girls, do you remember this map? This is a map of the United States, but this is a map of all of the different territories that when we purchased the different lands, and this is how we remember them. So do you remember this one? United States, 1783. Louisiana purchase, double the size. Florida purchased from Spain. Texas annexation, remember the Alamo. Mexican secession, President Polk. Gadsden purchase, choo-choo. Oregon country, spread the gospel. Alaska purchase, remember it was cold in Alaska. And Hawaii, right? Hawaii annexation, we call that one. Very good. All right, today in our history books, we're going to start a new chapter, chapter 18. And again, those wars are over, which is a great thing. We fought in many of those wars, and now those wars are over, and we're back in the United States, and we're noticing that people have this thing called a prejudice. Do you know what a prejudice is, boys and girls? We've talked about this before. A prejudice is when I don't like someone just because of a specific reason. Let's say I don't like someone just because they drink water. That would be silly, right? Yes. Okay. What if I decided that I don't like someone just because they wear skirts? Silly, right? Well, that would be a prejudice. I would have a prejudice against someone who was wearing a skirt or who was drinking water. Well, this thing called prejudice was very prevalent during this time, and especially for people who had different colored skin. Okay, for people who were at this time, and you would find it strange because we don't do this now because of what's gone on during this time in history. But again, we've talked about this before. Boys and girls who were white colored skin went to schools in this school, and boys and girls who were black colored skin went to schools in this specific school, and they separated them. They were not allowed to go to the same school. Well, what happened was things started to change during this time in the United States, and a Supreme Court was the one who decided. They had a court case, and they ruled that schools should no longer separate blacks and whites. Okay, remember that at this time, they were separated. They were not allowed to go to school with each other. So this court case from the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the law, decided that they were going to change those rules and merge the two schools. Like what they would do is they would, at the beginning it was difficult because they would say that, you know, boys and girls from black schools and white schools, they now had to go to the same schools, and it was a lot of chaos, but the ruling was very beneficial in the long run. We had a person named Dr. Martin Luther King, who was a civil rights activist during that time. He was a minister. He definitely organized some campaigns to get Blacks the same rights as white people. Also, after that came a Civil Rights Act, and this Civil Rights Act of 1964, it made laws that guaranteed a few different things. It guaranteed, number one, that voting was going to be legal for all. All people can vote. Whites and blacks could vote. It made sure that housing and job rights were legal for all, okay? All ethnic minorities could do the same things as the white people. And this was very, very important during this time. There was a person named Robert Weaver during this time that he was the first person on the cabinet. And that means that in the government, you have a president who is the head of the head of the government, but he has some people called advisors, and so they're called his cabinet, and they're almost like the people who tell him what to do, right? In a sense. And so at this time, before this time, they were all white people. But it was this person, this Robert Weaver, who was the first Black person, and he was a Black American, to become one of the president's advisors, which was a big deal. It's a big deal when that happened. And then Thurgood Marshall was the first American to become a justice on the Supreme Court. First Black American. It was a big deal as well, huge. Now things were starting to equal out, where Blacks were having the same rights as white people in America, and it was a lot of changes going on. So we're going to read in your book, page 222 and 224, and then you're going to, oops. Oh, I guess that's it. You don't have any homework today, which is great. And we will see you again tomorrow for the next lesson. You guys have a great day.